A girl acted oddly around her father at the clinic, avoiding eye contact and fidgeting in her seat. At first, the staff assumed she was just anxious about the appointment. But when the doctor performed an ultrasound, he froze at the screen, his expression turning to panic. Earlier that evening in Santa Rosa, a quiet California city in Sonoma County, Dr. Evan Lam had just wrapped up with a patient and was returning a forgotten eyeglass case to his nurse Rosa. As he passed the waiting room, he spotted Marco Hullen, a familiar neighbor seated beside a young girl in a red hoodie, his daughter Lucia. Dr. Lam greeted them warmly and returned to his office, but Rosa soon followed with concerns. She explained how Marco wouldn't let Lucia speak for herself, even to give her name, and how the girl avoided all eye contact. Rosa, who shared the same cultural background, insisted this behavior wasn't just cultural, it felt off. Reviewing Lucia's chart, Doctor, help me with a like and a subscribe, and please comment what country you are from. Lam's eyes widened. She was only 14 and showing signs of pregnancy. When Marco and Lucia entered the exam room, Marco quickly confirmed that his daughter was pregnant, speaking over Lucia at every turn and insisting on confidentiality. Dr. Lam, unsettled by the father's control and the girl's silence, gently tried to speak directly to Lucia, who barely nodded in response. With Marco growing tense, Dr. Lam moved forward with an ultrasound. As Lucia lay back on the table, wincing slightly, the atmosphere grew thick with unspoken fear until the image on the screen changed everything. Lucia nodded quietly as Marco explained that her abdominal pain had been getting worse. Dr. Lam applied the cool gel to her stomach, noting how she instinctively flinched at the contact. As he moved the transducer over her belly, his eyes fixed on the monitor. Something made him pause. "This is," he murmured, adjusting the machine for clarity. "Lucia, you're approximately 28 weeks pregnant." Marco's eyes widened in disbelief. "That can't be right. It hasn't been that long." Dr. Lam turned to him, his tone sharpened. "Have you taken her to see an obstetrician before?" Marco shook his head. "No, this is our first doctor visit." As the ultrasound progressed, Dr. Lam's concern deepened. "It's a girl," he said, then hesitated. "But I'm seeing some irregularities. Her abdominal measurements aren't consistent with 28 weeks. This suggests intrauterine growth restriction, what we call IUGR." Marco asked what that meant, and Dr. Lam explained that the baby wasn't growing at a normal rate, which could stem from issues with the placenta, the mother's health, or problems with the baby itself. He shifted the probe again, watching the screen closely. "There's also an irregular heartbeat," he added gravely. "Mr. Halcon Lucia needs to be taken to the hospital immediately. She requires specialized care I can't provide in this clinic." Marco's face darkened. "Can't you just give her some medicine?" Dr. Lam stayed calm. "This goes beyond medication. She needs monitoring, possibly intervention. The hospital has the equipment to assess blood flow to the baby and detect organ development issues." Though clearly resistant, Marco listened as the doctor handed him a prescription for vitamins and nutrients. "The pharmacy next door is still open. You can get these filled while Nurse Rosa helps Lucia clean up, Dr. Lam said, trying to ease the tension. Marco hesitated, then left with a final glance at his daughter. Once the door closed, Rosa gently wiped the gel from Lucia's belly. "You're going to be okay, sweetie," she said softly. Suddenly, Lucia's eyes filled with tears. "She kicks when she hears his voice," she whispered. "I hate that she likes him." The words struck both adults into silence, the room thick with a meaning neither wanted to assume. Dr. Lam spoke carefully. "Lucia, what do you mean by that?" But the girl had already shut down again, her moment of vulnerability gone. The doctor wondered if she was projecting her emotions or if something far more troubling was buried beneath her words. "What's done is done," he said gently. "Your father brought you here because he's worried. Let's focus on keeping you and the baby safe. That's why you need to go to the hospital." He handed her the printed ultrasound image, which she took without a word, staring at it as if it were an abstract painting she couldn't make sense of. Through the door's glass panel, dark locker, Lam spotted Marco returning from the pharmacy. The brief moment was over. Rosa helped Lucia sit up and gather her things. As they exited the clinic, Marco placed a firm hand on his daughter's shoulder, guiding her out. Once they were gone, Rosa returned to the exam room, visibly unsettled as she collected the remaining ultrasound printouts. 9 o'clock, she said, checking her watch. "That's the last one, right?" Dr. Lam nodded, still haunted by what he'd heard. "Yes, they were our final patients." Rosa began powering down the equipment, her movements efficient, but her thoughts clearly elsewhere. "That was strange, don't you think?" she asked at last. A girl hiding her pregnancy for 28 weeks. And what she said when her voice trailed off, the weight of unspoken suspicion hanging heavily between them. Dr. Lam leaned against his desk, nodding slowly. "I know," he said. "That was definitely unusual." Rosa, still unsettled, pressed him further. "What do you think she meant about the baby kicking when she hears his voice and her saying she hates that the baby likes him?" Dr. Lam ran a hand through his hair. "I'm assuming she kept the pregnancy secret from her father until recently. Maybe he got angry when he found out and now she's struggling with that emotionally." But Rosa wasn't convinced. "She didn't say she hates him. She said she hates that the baby likes him. That's different." "Doesn't that strike you as strange?" Dr. Lam suggested. "It could just be a storm of teenage hormones colliding with pregnancy hormones, mood swings, emotional outbursts, heightened sensitivity." But even he wasn't sold on his own explanation. Rosa gave a slow nod, though her expression still carried doubt. "I hope they actually go to the hospital like you told them." "Me too," Dr. Lam replied. "That baby needs proper monitoring." They finished locking up the clinic together, the rest of the staff already gone. As they stepped out into the cool night, the parking lot was nearly empty. "Have a good night, Doctor," Rosa said as she headed for her car. "You too, Rosa. See you tomorrow." Dr. Lam climbed into his sedan, but his thoughts remained with Lucia and Marco. He replayed their visit over and over, trying to make sense of the tension, the silences, the subtle signals. Something didn't sit right. As he drove into his neighborhood, streetlights cast quiet shadows over the sleepy suburb. He slowed as he passed the Halcon residence, just 3 houses from his own, and spotted their car still in the driveway. They didn't go. he muttered, a flicker of unease rising in his chest. Parking in his own driveway, he sat for a moment in the dark, weighing what to do. Maybe they hadn't understood how serious the situation was. Irregular heartbeat, growth restriction, those weren't minor issues, especially not for a 14-year-old. It wasn't his job to chase down patients who ignored medical advice. But Lucia's words echoed hauntingly. She kicks when she hears his voice. I hate that she likes him. With a sigh, he stepped out of his car and walked back down the street toward the Halcon house. The windows glowed with warm light. He hesitated, then knocked firmly. A few moments later, the door opened. Marco stood there, surprised at first, then composed himself. Dr. Lam, is everything okay? He asked. I was just checking in, Lam said, keeping his tone casual. I saw your car and was a little concerned since I'd strongly recommended getting Lucia to the hospital right away. Marco's expression shifted slightly. Ah, yes. Thank you for your concern. Lucia went to the hospital with her mother. I stayed behind to finish some work. That stopped Dr. Lam in his tracks. It was the first time Marco had ever mentioned Lucia's mother. I see, he said cautiously. That's good. I was really worried about the baby's condition. She's in good hands now. Marco said, his tone clipped. Thanks for stopping by, doctor, but it's getting late and I've got work to finish. Of course, Dr. Lam nodded. Sorry to disturb you. Good night, Mr. Halcon. Good night. The door closed firmly, leaving Dr. Lam on the porch with a growing sense of unease. As he walked back to his house, Marco's explanation replayed in his mind, raising more questions than it answered. Back inside, he opened the fridge and stared blankly at the contents, his appetite dulled by concern. He pulled out leftovers chicken pasta and set them in the microwave, but hardly noticed the beep when it finished. Rosa's voice echoed in his head, along with Lucia's cryptic comment and Marco's tight control of the conversation. And now the sudden appearance of a supposedly involved mother no one had ever seen. That struck a chord. He had lived just down the street from them for over a year, while he'd seen Marco and occasionally Lucia. He couldn't recall a single time he'd seen the mother, not once. Setting his plate down in his home office, he opened his laptop and hesitated. This probably crosses some professional boundaries, he muttered, but something isn't right. He opened Facebook and typed in Marco Halcon's name, hoping for answers. Dr. Lam quickly found Marco's profile. The man had minimal privacy settings, allowing him to browse photos and information freely. Scanning Marco's friend list, he searched for someone who could be Lucia's mother. The name Daniela Rivera stood out. It sounded familiar, as if from a long-forgotten conversation. Her profile picture sparked recognition. Her features bore a faint resemblance to Lucia's, and Dr. Lam felt certain he had seen her face before. He clicked into her page. Though public information was sparse, one detail stood out. There hadn't been any recent photos of Daniela with Marco or Lucia. In fact, as he scrolled through years of posts, he noticed a glaring absence of any family content. There were pictures of work events and friends, but not a single recent image with her daughter. If they're divorced, that might explain it, he muttered. But why would Marco say Lucia went to the hospital with her? He knew he was crossing a line by looking into a patient's family like this, but his concern for Lucia and the subtle signals she'd given off outweighed any professional hesitation. He opened Facebook Messenger and typed a message to Daniela. "Hello, Miss Rivera. I apologize for contacting you this way. I'm Dr. Evan Lam, a family physician. I saw your daughter Lucia today. I just wanted to check how the hospital visit is going. Again, sorry for the intrusion." He hesitated, but then hit send, knowing it might raise alarms, but hoping it would lead to clarity. He finished his dinner periodically, checking his screen, but no response came. After cleaning up, changing, and getting ready for bed, he checked his phone one last time and saw a reply. Daniela had written, "What hospital visit is something wrong with Lucia?" Before he could type back, his phone rang a Facebook call. He sat up and answered. "Hello, Dr. Lam speaking." Daniela's voice was tight with worry. "Doctor, what's going on? What do you mean about a hospital visit? I'm not with Lucia. I haven't seen her in years." Dr. Lam's heart sank. "Miss Rivera," he said cautiously, "Lucia came to my clinic this evening. She was brought in by her father. She's pregnant, approximately 28 weeks along." He heard her sharp intake of breath. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I haven't seen Lucia in almost 3 years. Marco and I have been divorced for 10. He has full custody. I'm not even allowed near her." Dr. Lam closed his eyes, the pieces beginning to fall into place. "Lucia is in her 3rd trimester, he said gently. "There are complications. She has intrauterine growth restriction, which means the baby isn't developing at a normal rate, possibly due to poor placental function. I also detected an irregular heartbeat. I strongly urged them to go to the hospital immediately so specialists could assess the baby's condition." Daniela's voice cracked. "Oh my God, she's only 14. How could this happen? Who did this to her?" "Marco said she has a boyfriend," Dr. Lam answered, though he now doubted everything Marco had claimed. Daniela was panicked. "I want to see her, right now. I don't care about the restraining order. That's my daughter." "Please," Dr. Lam said calmly, "we have to handle this carefully. She's vulnerable. Too much emotional stress could trigger premature labor." Daniela reluctantly agreed, her voice trembling. "What will you do?" "I'm going to check on her again," he promised. After hanging up, he returned to his laptop and pulled up Lucia's ultrasound records. The images confirmed his earlier diagnosis, growth restriction concerning blood flow and possible placental insufficiency. It was a dangerous situation. His clock read 10:15 p.m. But he knew he couldn't wait until morning. Lucia needed help, and Marco had lied to his face. Throwing on jeans and a jacket, he stepped back into the cool night. Fog had begun to creep along the pavement. The Halcon house stood quiet, but lit silhouetted against the mist. He approached the door, determined, and knocked. A few moments passed before the door opened, not to Marco, but to Lucia. Her eyes widened when she saw him. "Dr. Lam?" she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Lucia," he said softly, "did you go to the hospital?" She shook her head, fingers tugging at the hem of her hoodie. "Lucia, I need you to be honest," he said gently. "Why did you hide the pregnancy for so long? What's really happening here?" She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say a word, a voice bellowed from inside. "Who is it, Lucia? Is that the delivery guy? What's taking so long?" Fear flashed in her eyes. "Please go," she whispered, already starting to close the door. "Please," Dr. Lam said, placing his hand gently on the door to keep it from closing. "Lucia, I can help you. Let me help." "I can't," she breathed, her voice shaking as she pushed the door shut. He stood there, frozen, torn. Technically, his duty was done. He had informed Marco of the risks, strongly recommended urgent hospital care, and had no legal grounds to push further. But something about that house felt wrong, deeply, disturbingly wrong, and he couldn't shake the sense that walking away might mean failing someone who needed him. He had promised Daniela he would look after Lucia, and that promise still clung to his conscience. Just as he turned to leave, the front door reopened. This time, Marco stood in the frame, his face tight with irritation. "Dr. Lam," he said coolly, "why do you keep coming to my house?" "It's late." The doctor kept his voice calm, measured. "Mr. Halcon, I'm concerned about Lucia's condition. You told me she went to the hospital with her mother, but I've just learned that's not true." Marco's jaw clenched. "You've been checking up on me. Who I take my daughter to is none of your business." "Her health is my business," Dr. Lam replied. "The baby's condition is serious. Any delay could be dangerous." Marco looked ready to argue, but a light flicked on next door, and a curtain shifted. Neighbors were watching. His demeanor shifted instantly. "Perhaps we should continue this inside," he said, suddenly affable. "No need to alarm the neighborhood." After a moment of hesitation, Dr. Lam stepped inside. The living room was modest, with worn furniture and a muted air of neglect. Lucia sat on the couch, her shoulders hunched, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Lucia," he said gently, "how are you feeling?" Before she could answer, Marco cut in. "She's fine, just tired." "Pregnant women get tired, right, doctor?" Dr. Lam turned to him. "Mr. Halcon, you need to understand the gravity of what I found. Intrauterine growth restriction and an irregular fetal heartbeat aren't symptoms to be ignored." "And we won't," Marco replied quickly. "We'll go to the hospital first thing in the morning." "Why not tonight?" Dr. Lam pressed. "Because it's late," Marco said, gesturing to the clock. "Lucia's exhausted. Dragging her to the ER just for a long wait isn't what's best for her. If the baby is in distress, every hour matters." Marco's expression turned hard. "The baby won't die overnight." The bluntness of the remark stunned Dr. Lam, but before he could respond, the doorbell rang. Marco's body relaxed. "That'll be the delivery. I ordered dinner." He turned to Lucia. "Wait here with the doctor, I'll get it." As he walked to the front, Dr. Lam moved closer to Lucia. "Are you okay?" he asked in a low voice. "Is there something you want to tell me?" Lucia glanced toward the door, where her father fumbled for change. Quickly, she pulled several folded photographs from her pocket and pressed them into Dr. Lam's hand. He slipped them into his jacket without looking. She leaned in and whispered, "More in bedroom. I'll help you." "You're being very brave," he whispered back. Marco returned with a pizza box. "What are you two chatting about?" Lucia said, "She's hungry." Dr. Lam replied smoothly. "Which is good. Her appetite's a positive sign." "See, I take care of her," Marco said, setting the box down with performative pride. "I make sure she eats well." He turned coldly polite. "Now I appreciate your concern, doctor, but it's getting late. As you said, she needs rest. Recognizing the dismissal, Dr. Lam nodded. Rest is important, he said, but so is timely care. And she'll get it first thing tomorrow, I promise. With no legal authority to intervene further, Dr. Lam walked to the door. I'll check in tomorrow to see how the hospital visit went. He said, the message pointed. Of course, Marco replied, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Good night, doctor. As Dr. Lam stepped outside, he glanced back through the window. Marco was speaking animatedly at the table, gesturing over the pizza box, while Lucia sat silently, her gaze locked on the tabletop. Back home, Dr. Lam immediately retrieved the photographs from his jacket and unfolded them one by one. What Dr. Lam saw made his blood run cold. There were 4 photographs, each showing Lucia in various stages of undress on what appeared to be a bed, and in each, Marco was clearly visible. The images captured abuse in horrifying, explicit detail. My God, Dr. Lam whispered, his hands trembling as he turned the photos face down, unable to bear looking at them any longer. Lucia's words from earlier echoed back with devastating clarity. She kicks when she hears his voice. I hate that she likes him. The truth hit like a physical blow. Marco wasn't just the father in name. He was the father of Lucia's baby. There was no boyfriend, only a predator who had preyed on his own daughter, hiding in plain sight just 3 houses down. Heart racing, Dr. Lam grabbed his phone and dialed 911. Emergency services, the dispatcher answered. What's your emergency? I need to report child abuse and endangerment, he said somehow, steady despite the chaos inside him. A 14-year-old girl is 28 weeks pregnant. The father is the abuser. Both she and the baby need immediate medical attention. As he waited for the police, Dr. Lam snapped digital copies of the photos, ensuring the evidence would remain, even if something happened to the originals. He messaged Daniela on Facebook, attaching the images and briefly explaining that he had contacted law enforcement. Her response was almost instant. She called voice raw with rage. I'm coming right now, she said. That monster, I'll kill him. Please, Dr. Lam urged. Let the police handle this. The important thing is getting Lucia to safety. Daniela was sobbing, devastated. I knew something was wrong when he fought so hard for custody, but I never imagined this. I never thought Lucia reached out, he said gently. She was brave. We can act now. I'm still coming, she said firmly. She needs me. Then come, Dr. Lam replied. Just stay back until the police clear the scene. After hanging up, he paced his living room, glancing out the window, anxiety building with every second. Only 20 minutes passed, though it felt like hours before police cruisers arrived, silently lights flashing but sirens off. He stepped out to meet them. I'm Dr. Evan Lam, he told the lead officer. I made the call. Detective Morales, the man replied. You have evidence. Dr. Lam handed him the photographs. Lucia gave me these less than an hour ago. She said there are more inside the house. Morales' jaw tightened as he scanned the images. She's pregnant? Yes, 28 weeks. And the fetus has complications, growth restriction, and irregular heartbeat. She needs to be hospitalized immediately. As officers moved quietly to surround the Halcon home, Morales and another approached the front door. They knocked firmly. No answer. They tried again, louder, identifying themselves. Still nothing. Then a voice crackled over the radio movement, spotted inside, but no one coming to the door. Morales made the call. "We're going in. Possible endangered minor inside." Moments later, a battering ram splintered the front door. The team swept in voices, calling out their presence. Curious neighbors stepped outside, drawn by the activity. An elderly couple from next door approached Dr. Lam. "What's happening?" the woman asked, pulling her robe tight. But before he could answer, voices rose from inside. Shouts. Then louder commotion, an officer's voice rang out. There on the roof, Dr. Lam's heart stopped as he looked up. Marco had climbed out of an attic window, dragging Lucia with him onto the sloped roof above the garage. His hand gripped her wrist, pulling her dangerously close to the edge. "Stay back," Marco screamed at the officers below. "If I go down, we all go down. We're a family." Lucia, crying, her free hand cradling her pregnant belly, pleaded, "Please don't. Please help me." Officers immediately radioed for backup and deployed a large inflatable cushion beneath them. Dr. Lam, despite being warned to stay back, stepped forward. "Marco," he called out, "don't do this. The police have the photographs. They know everything." Marco's expression twisted in fury. "She gave you those, you little bitch," he spat at Lucia. "After everything I've done for you, you don't deserve to live." Just then a car skidded to a stop outside the police line. Daniela leapt out, screaming. "That's my daughter," she shouted, struggling against the officers, trying to hold her back. "Lucia, I'm here." "Baby," Lucia's tear-streaked face turned to the sound. "Mom," she cried, her voice cracking. The brief distraction allowed Marco to yank her closer to the ledge. Officers at the back had managed to get into the attic, positioning themselves for a possible takedown. Marco Halcon Detective Morales called through a megaphone. "This is the Santa Rosa Police Department. Release the girl and surrender. There's nowhere to go." Dr. Lam could see the tension tightening in Marco's shoulders and the growing desperation in his eyes. But Marco had also spotted the officers behind him, and now the situation teetered on a razor's edge. "Stay!" he began to shout. Back, Marco screamed, dragging Lucia dangerously closer to the roof's edge. "I'll jump with her if I have to." Below, officers shouted commands and readied their positions, while Daniela, having broken free of police restraint, rushed forward in a frenzy. "Please, Marco, she's our daughter. Don't hurt her. She's mine," Marco snarled. "You never deserved her. You never deserved either of them." In that instant, Dr. Lam saw the horrifying truth. Marco wasn't just exerting control over Lucia. He viewed her and her unborn child as possessions, his property to command or destroy. Officers at the attic window began climbing onto the roof, blocking any chance of escape. Marco, seeing himself cornered, made his decision. "No," Dr. Lam shouted, stepping forward in horror. But it was too late. Marco shoved Lucia off the roof. Her terrified scream sliced through the night air as she plunged toward the ground, landing on the inflatable cushion below with a heavy thud. Officers immediately swarmed to her side, while others lunged at Marco, who attempted to leap in the opposite direction. He didn't make it far. Two officers tackled him, mid-air, slamming him down on the roof with brutal efficiency before handcuffing him and securing the area. Dr. Lam rushed to Lucia's side as paramedics surrounded her, checking vitals. "I'm her doctor," he said urgently, kneeling beside her. "Lucia, can you hear me?" Her tear-streaked face turned toward him, eyes fluttering open. "The baby," she whispered, voice thin with fear. "Is the baby okay?" Dr. Lam placed a hand gently on her abdomen. "We'll take you to the hospital, to be sure," he said calmly. "But I think your baby is going to be just fine. You were so brave, Lucia. So incredibly brave." Around them, red and blue lights pulsed across the street. Officers led a restrained Marco toward a waiting cruiser, his face twisted with hate. As they passed Daniela, who stood pale and trembling, Marco hissed, "This is your fault. You were never a real mother to her." "You monster!" Daniela shouted, her pain erupting as she lunged forward before officers quickly held her back. "What you did to our daughter? You're not even human." Another officer guided her aside, while Marco was shoved into the back of the patrol car. "He should rot in prison forever," Daniela sobbed as Dr. Lam approached her. "I always knew something was wrong with him. But this, you couldn't have known," Dr. Lam said gently. "People like Marco are experts at hiding who they really are." Paramedics had stabilized Lucia on a stretcher and were preparing to transport her. "She needs you now," Dr. Lam told Daniela. "Focus on her, not him." Daniela nodded, wiping her tears. As she neared the stretcher, Lucia reached out a trembling hand. "Mom," she whispered, "I missed you." Daniela grasped her daughter's hand, kissing it through sobs. "I missed you too, baby. So much. I'm here now and I'm never leaving you again." Dr. Lam turned to the lead paramedic. "I'm her physician. May I accompany you to the hospital?" "We'd welcome your input, doctor," the paramedic replied. As they loaded Lucia into the ambulance, Detective Morales approached. "Doctor, we'll need to speak with you at the hospital," he said. Then to Daniela, "And you as well, ma'am. But for now, stay with your daughter." Daniela climbed in beside Lucia, never letting go of her hand, and Dr. Lam took a seat opposite them. Inside, the paramedics worked efficiently, monitoring vitals. Dr. Lam gently placed his stethoscope to Lucia's belly. "The heartbeat is irregular, but strong," he said. "It doesn't seem like the fall caused any trauma, but we'll let the hospital confirm everything." The siren wailed as they sped through Santa Rosa's quiet streets. Despite everything, Daniela stroked her daughter's hair, whispering reassurances. Their bond, fractured by years of separation, had survived, resilient against a decade of darkness. At the hospital, a specialized team awaited their arrival. Dr. Lam quickly briefed Dr. Elena Vasquez, the attending obstetrician. 14 years old, 28 weeks along IUGR, with arrhythmia, he reported. Possible minor trauma from a fall onto a safety cushion. Dr. Vasquez nodded. "We'll take it from here, doctor. And thank you for everything." As Lucia was taken inside, Dr. Lam joined Daniela in the waiting area. Detective Morales arrived shortly after, along with another officer and a woman from Child Protective Services. "I'm Rebecca Miller," she introduced. "We need to document what happened tonight." Detective Morales looked at Dr. Lam. "Please, doctor. Start from the beginning." Calmly but firmly, Dr. Lam detailed every moment of the night, from the tension in the clinic, Lucia's cryptic words, the troubling ultrasound, to the truth revealed by the photographs. Marco claimed the baby's father was a boyfriend, he explained, but Lucia's comment about the baby kicking when it heard his voice. Now I understand what she meant. Detective Morales nodded grimly. We searched the house. Just like she told you, we found a hidden room in the basement, recording equipment, cameras, evidence of prolonged abuse. The words hung in the air heavy and final. Daniela covered her mouth, stifling a sob as Detective Morales continued. His bedroom contained hundreds of photographs of Lucia. Some date back several years. This has been going on for a very long time. How could this happen? Daniela asked, her voice cracking. How could no one notice Miss Miller from Child Protective Services spoke gently but firmly? Predators like Marco isolate their victims. They sever every support system, family, friends, even school. It's slow, calculated, and deliberately hidden. We'll understand more once Lucia is ready to give her statement. Detective Morales turned to Daniela. Miss Rivera, we need to understand how Marco got custody of Lucia. It might help strengthen the case against him. Daniela nodded slowly, wiping tears from her cheeks. I'm not proud of what happened, she said. After the divorce 10 years ago, I was a single mom working nights at a casino. Money was tight. I got involved in underground poker games hoping to stretch our income, but I lost control. One night, the house was raided and the police discovered I'd left Lucia, just 7 years old, home alone. Her voice faltered, but she continued. Marco took advantage of that. He painted himself as the stable parent. The court gave him full custody, and I was only allowed supervised visits. Then he moved her here and got a restraining order, saying I was unstable and dangerous. He made sure I couldn't reach her. Miss Miller nodded in understanding. It's a pattern we see far too often. Daniela straightened slightly, her voice steadier. I've spent the last 3 years putting my life back together. I have a job now, a stable home, a second bedroom waiting for her. I've saved every dollar I could, hoping to file for custody again. But Marco blocked every attempt. Before anyone could respond, Dr. Vasquez entered, her expression serious, but not grim. The room fell silent. Lucia is stable, she reported. The baby's heartbeat is still irregular, but we've started medication to manage it. We've also begun steroid injections to accelerate fetal lung development, critical in cases like this. She's malnourished and clearly suffering from prolonged stress and trauma, but physically she should recover. And the baby, Daniela asked. We're monitoring closely, Dr. Vasquez said. The next 48 hours will be crucial. Thankfully, the fall doesn't appear to have caused a placental abruption. But the growth restriction and arrhythmia remain concerns. Can we see her? Dr. Lam asked. She's asking for her mother? Dr. Vasquez replied with a soft smile. And for you too, doctor. She said you saved her life. They entered the hospital room quietly. Monitors beeped in steady rhythm. Lucia lay propped up against pillows, fetal sensors strapped across her small, swollen abdomen. Though pale and fragile, there was a new spark in her eyes, a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. The weight of her silence was gone. Daniela approached her slowly, almost afraid she might vanish. Lucia, she whispered, taking her daughter's hand. My brave, beautiful girl. Lucia's eyes welled with tears. Mom, you came back. I never stopped trying to come back, Daniela said, sitting gently at her side. Your father made it impossible, but that's over now. He can never hurt you again. Dr. Lam stood quietly at the foot of the bed, giving them space. Detective Morales and Ms. Miller waited just outside the doorway, understanding the moment's gravity. After several minutes, Lucia looked up at Dr. Lam. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for believing me, for helping us." "You're the brave one," Lucia, Dr. Lam said with sincerity. "You had the courage to speak out, and that saved you and your baby." Detective Morales stepped forward. "Lucia, I know this is difficult, but when you're ready, we need your help to bring charges against your father." "Would it be okay if we asked you some questions?" Lucia glanced at her mother, who squeezed her hand gently. "It's your choice, sweetheart. Whatever you decide, I'm right here." Lucia nodded slowly. "I want to tell the truth, all of it." "Take your time," Miss Miller said gently, "and if you need to stop, just say so." Lucia drew a deep breath, gathering strength. Her voice was soft, but it didn't tremble. "There was never a boyfriend," she said, confirming what they all now feared. "My father, he's the father of my baby too." Lucia described how the abuse had started shortly after Marco gained full custody, how he had slowly, deliberately cut her off from the world. "He pulled me out of school," she said quietly, told people he was homeschooling me. But there were never real lessons, just enough to answer basic questions if anyone ever asked. Her voice faltered. "Whenever someone came to the house, he locked me in the basement. There's a hidden room down there. That's where most of it happened." Dr. Lam felt a wave of nausea, remembering the evidence police had uncovered in that room. "When I got pregnant," Lucia continued, "he was angry. He said I'd ruined everything. At first, he wanted me to have an abortion. But then he changed. He started calling the baby ours. He became protective, obsessive." She shuddered. When she started kicking, she'd move whenever she heard his voice. It made me feel sick. I hated that she responded to him. She placed a gentle hand over her belly. "But it's not her fault. She's innocent. She didn't choose any of this." Daniela squeezed her daughter's hand. "Of course she's innocent. And she'll never be near him again." Lucia nodded. "A couple of weeks ago, I started feeling really sick. Bad cramps, dizziness. He ignored it until I could barely walk. That's when he finally agreed to take me to a doctor. That's how we ended up at Dr. Lam's clinic." Detective Morales, taking detailed notes, asked, "The photographs you gave the doctor, how did you get them?" "He kept them in a box in his closet," Lucia answered. "He took pictures all the time. I waited until he was in the shower before our appointment and snuck a few into my hoodie. I didn't know what to do or who to trust. But when Dr. Lam came to our house, something told me he might help." "You did exactly the right thing," Dr. Lam said gently. Dr. Vasquez returned to check the monitors. "The medication is helping regulate the baby's heartbeat," she reported. "And your vitals are stabilizing too, Lucia. That's excellent news." "What happens now?" Lucia asked, eyes searching the faces around her. Miss Miller, from CPS, stepped forward. "You'll remain in the hospital until you're medically cleared. After that, we'll determine the safest living situation for you and your baby." "She's coming home with me," Daniela said firmly. "I've prepared for this moment for years. I have a job, a stable apartment, a room ready for Lucia, and the baby savings to support them." Miss Miller nodded. "Given the circumstances, that seems like the best option. We'll conduct a formal home evaluation, but I don't foresee any issues with placing Lucia in your care. Lucia hesitated. What about my father? He's in custody, Detective Morales said. The evidence we've already collected, the photographs, the basement, your statement. It's more than enough. He'll be charged with multiple felonies, child abuse, sexual assault, incest, and endangerment. He won't be free again. Not for a very, very long time. A mixture of emotions passed over Lucia's face. Grief, relief, and the first glimmer of closure. And the baby, she asked softly. Will she be okay? Dr. Vasquez gave her a reassuring look. We're doing everything we can. The next few weeks are critical. We'll continue with steroid injections, monitor her heart, and focus on nutrition. She has a strong heartbeat. That's a good sign. Lucia was quiet for a moment, then said, I want to keep her. The room fell silent. I know, I'm young, but she's not responsible for how she came into this world. I don't want her to suffer because of what he did. Daniela leaned in and kissed her daughter's forehead. Then we'll raise her together, she said. You, me, and your daughter. She'll be loved, protected, always. As night deepened, Detective Morales and Miss Miller left, promising to return the next day. Dr. Vasquez completed her exam and moved on to her other patients. Daniela settled into the chair beside Lucia's bed, unwilling to leave her daughter's side. Dr. Lam prepared to leave as well, his role as physician fulfilled, but his heart still burdened by the weight of what he had witnessed. Dr. Lam Lucia called out just as he reached the door. Thank you for listening, for seeing something was wrong. He turned back, moved by the strength in her voice. I'm just glad I could help. You did more than help, Daniela. Added quietly, you saved them both when everyone else looked away. Driving home through the sleeping streets of Santa Rosa, the sky just beginning to lighten with dawn, Dr. Lam reflected on the night's events. His decision to trust his instincts, to step beyond protocol and confront what others had missed, had changed the course of two lives. The Halcon house stood silent behind yellow crime scene tape, a neighborhood now bearing the invisible weight of truths too long hidden. As he stepped inside his own home, weary but resolved, he realized that medicine's first oath, do no harm, wasn't always enough. Sometimes, truly, doing good required seeing beyond symptoms, asking the uncomfortable questions, and acting when others chose silence. Lying down at last, Dr. Lam thought of Lucia and the child she had chosen to protect. Their road ahead would be difficult, but they would not walk it alone. And in the quiet that followed, as sleep began to take him, one truth remained: the most important diagnosis a doctor could ever make was the one that recognized suffering before it had a name and answered it with compassion and the courage to act. Thank you for choosing my video among thousands of videos out there to watch. Helping me with a subscription of yours is very small but very big and too valuable.